Say something.
Something.
Your dad is so pink.
You're pink.
I love you.
Aww.
Hey everybody, Deathblade here with another Chinese fantasy novel FAQ. My hair is yet again getting very shaggy, so I popped this hat on so you don't see how disgusting and ridiculous it looks. Today I'm going to be talking about a term from Chinese Wuxia, Xianxia, and Xuanhuan novels, primarily Wuxia, and that term is Jianghu. Now, one of the topics I avoid on my channel are things that you can find information about easily just by Googling. And actually, if you Google Jianghu, you can get some pretty good information. If you go to the Wikipedia page for Wuxia, there's a whole section on it. The thing about that section is that, first of all, there's no references to it. Second of all, I think it was all written by one person. I didn't check, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But there is some information in the Wikipedia section of Wuxia about Jianghu that I think is oddly specific and a little bit too specific, because the term as used in Wuxia can be adapted by different authors. So I feel that a explanatory section about Jianghu shouldn't be so specific about certain aspects that might appear in one author's work but not in another author's work. That said, it is a good source of information, and there are others that you can basically piece together a bit of information about what Jianghu is. Now literally Jianghu means river, Jiang, and lake, Hu. So Jianghu means river and lake, and there's some specifics about the theories about why that term sprang up. And in fact, the term is used differently throughout the years as you go back into Chinese literature. In this video, I'm not going to go into an incredible amount of detail about what the Jianghu is, and I do want to point out that it actually has multiple definitions. The term is a common word in the Chinese language in modern times, and when it is used in that sense, it basically just means a society or the world in which you live. I've heard young people in college use it, I've heard adults use it, it gets used in TV shows that have nothing to do with Wuxia or Chinese fantasy novels. It's really a common term in Chinese, and throughout the years it has been used in a variety of different forms. So I'm not going to really get into all of that. I'm just going to talk about how it is used in Chinese fantasy novels in the general sense, and mostly Wuxia novels. Basically, it is the world of the Wuxia novel, the world that it takes place in, the world that the characters live in. And I'm not talking about the world, I'm not talking about China, I'm talking about sort of like an underworld culture in which the martial artists, the prostitutes, the gamblers, the assassins, all of these people, they occupy this world that's unique and separate from the world at large. Now the two can interact. As I mentioned in the video I did about Star Wars, the wandering martial artists might deal with merchants, and the merchants might not necessarily be considered part of Jianghu, but rather general culture. A lot of times the government is sort of part of the Jianghu, but not part of the Jianghu. So this is basically just the world of those people who exist kind of outside of society. They have their own way of doing things, their own code of conduct, and that's basically what the Jianghu is. There is a subsection kind of the Jianghu, and that's called Wulin. Wu means martial and Lin means forest. I've seen these terms, I think, overanalyzed a lot, at least in my opinion, where some people come up with complicated definitions about how Wulin is a subsection of Jianghu. I have seen them used interchangeably a lot. That said, Wulin does specifically focus on martial arts. It has the Wu character for martial, and so generally speaking, if you see Wulin, it's definitely going to be specifically talking about the martial artists, whereas Jianghu doesn't necessarily specifically have to do with martial artists, but it is the people who exist in that sort of underworld. So for example, if you're talking about gangster movies, you would have the criminal underworld. That's basically what the Jianghu is like. It is not a physical place. It's a word used to describe the lifestyle and the world that those people live in. Now, one thing about the Jianghu that I think really needs to be emphasized is how important it is to the Wuxia genre. In my video about why Star Wars is not Wuxia, I pointed out that Jianghu is very, very important to Wuxia novels, to the point where I think that all Wuxia novels, and by extension comic books or movies or whatever, TV shows, they all have the Jianghu in them. I haven't done a scientific study to confirm that fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if literally every single movie that is about Wuxia has the word Jianghu spoken in it. Sadly, the word does not come across translated in the subtitles or dubbing in virtually any of the movies that I know about. Now, I've watched a lot of movies. I haven't watched every single one. I haven't watched every single version of the subtitles for every single movie, and I don't generally listen to the dubbed versions because I really don't like them. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on the actual term Jianghu does come up here and there, but I have watched so many martial arts and kung fu movies where in the spoken dialogue the characters are talking about the Jianghu, but it doesn't get translated into the subtitles, or I have seen some dubbed ones where it doesn't get translated. It'll get translated a lot of different ways. Sometimes they'll call it the underworld, sometimes they'll just call it society, and I really feel that this has led to a sort of a lack of awareness of it among people specifically who watch wuxia movies and other wuxia media as opposed to reading the books. Now in the books that get translated, some translators will call it the river and lake world. I used to like that a lot. I thought it was very poetic and sounded really cool. I personally don't do that nowadays, and I don't think that's the best way to handle the translation because it doesn't really have anything to do with rivers or lakes. I think it's such a unique and integral part that transliterating it into English is fine, and that's what I do personally. In the role-playing game Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades that I co-wrote and is currently scheduled to come out in a few months as of the recording of this video, the Jianghu is a major portion of that game. We provide our own version of it, and we also encourage the game masters and players to make their own version of it. That actually is a key point that I think bears mentioning, and I did touch on this earlier. There isn't some set of rules that are codified among the wuxia writers of China Association. Of course, that doesn't exist. Point is, there is no set definition of what the Jianghu is or what it's supposed to include or not include or how it's supposed to work or what rules govern it. There are some common themes that you'll see from author to author, but every author can handle it differently. Movies can handle it differently. TV shows can handle it differently. And this goes back to what I was mentioning about the entry in Wikipedia, which goes into a lot of detail about all these different rules and things. I don't think that's a proper way to look at it any more than you can specifically define what the criminal underworld is in a gangster movie or in gangster books. Obviously, every different author, director can handle it in slightly different ways. That said, the overall general idea is usually the same from work to work. To some extent, being in the Jianghu is sort of like being a member of a group of people. I feel like that's the way it's portrayed a lot of times in the novels, and the reason I say that is because one of the common themes, and again, this isn't a rule, and not necessarily saying you'll see it in every single book or every single movie, the idea of retiring from the Jianghu. So a lot of times martial artists will get, they'll be very powerful, but they're kind of tired of all the bloodshed that usually is a feature of the Jianghu. They want to kind of get away from that, and so they'll perform some ceremony. Maybe it's washing their hands in a golden bowl, and then that signifies that they are now not part of the Jianghu. Unlike the criminal underworld of the mafia movies, it's a lot easier to leave the Jianghu than you might think. Sometimes people will simply just, instead of formally retiring, they'll just disappear and they'll go off and live in a cave somewhere. But the point is that there is a way to extract yourself from it and not be a part of it anymore. So this is my brief take on the Jianghu. I can't overemphasize how important it is to wuxia novels. If you're somebody who is writing a Chinese fantasy novel, especially wuxia, you definitely, absolutely should include this. And I know that this video isn't an exhaustive introduction to it, so I do encourage you to do some research of your own and try to find out more information. Put your own spin on it, that's fine, totally okay. If you're dealing with Xianxia and Xuanhuan novels, the other kind of like cultivation, high fantasy types, they don't necessarily feature the Jianghu as much. A lot of times they will in the earlier levels, I've noticed this. So it's kind of akin to the Jianghu being the more mortal, down-to-earth sort of real-life martial artist, and then as they progress through the cultivation ranks and become an immortal and a god, they kind of leave that behind. So the Jianghu in the cultivation novels isn't something that you see much past the mortal world, at least in my experience. I haven't read every single Chinese fantasy novel out there. So speaking of which, if you are a fan of Chinese fantasy novels, especially wuxia, but also Xianxia, Xuanhuan, have you seen the Jianghu? Has it differed from my description? Do you have any other thoughts or comments or questions about them? Please do leave them in the comments below. I should mention that this video was voted on by patrons over at Patreon. The last time I checked the poll, it was a tie between two different topics. So I'm actually going to record both topics, and then I'll put one of the videos into my little, very small stockpile that I'm keeping in for a rainy day to release later. If you like this kind of content, please do like and subscribe. Please share, leave comments, and if you want to support directly, check the description box. There's plenty of ways to do that. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Godsla.